Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Okay, it's been a while since we've done this, and I just kind of launched into the to the script, which oh my God. How was your fourth?
The fourth was, I was going to say quiet, but there was actually quite a lot of noise outside the house, but it was quiet inside the house.
We actually didn't have as many fireworks, illegally as I thought we would, which was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah.
I watched Independence Day twice. I love that movie. Anyway,
I spent the evening finishing book 5 of the Murderbot series.
oh, okay. Okay, cool.
Which is excellent. Everybody should read that.
I'm currently on book 7 of the Dark Tower series.
Uh-huh.
It's the final book. I'm about halfway through. And I had to stop because I was doing that deep cleaning.
Oh, yeah.
And I just was too tired by the end of it. So I'll pick it up after this. But then after that, I've got 2 novellas and a bunch of comics to get through before I've totally made my trip to the tower, is how people put it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. So,
wow.
Yeah. But I love Stephen King. So, okay. Well, welcome to Goodnight, Mr. Holmes, a podcast about the Granada Sherlock Holmes, which ran on ITV in the UK between 1984 and 1994 and ran on Masterpiece Mystery in the US around the same time. I'm Laura.
And I'm Rachel.
And today we're looking at episode 18 in the series, which is called The Man with the Twisted Lip. So this was published in, I want to say, 1891.
Yeah, it was first published in The Strand in 1891.
Okay, so it was The Strand. Okay.
Yes, sorry, it's been a little while. I forgot.
I know, we're right. So the episode begins with a bunch of men in top hats and pinstripe trousers and morning coats, all streaming out of a large institutional-like building. And I could not identify this building. But it was a big building. Congratulating themselves on having had a good meeting.
I assumed it was like a Masonic meeting or something. Just
maybe. Yeah. I mean, because I looked it up. I knew it wasn't the Inns of Court, any of them. And it certainly wasn't Parliament. But, these are gentlemen.
Yes.
And they're met by a beggar sitting outside selling matches, who lavishes all who give him money with extravagant praise and blessings. And the camera focuses on an older businessman with a seriously gargantuan mustache, who passes by the beggar without paying attention. The beggar turns his head, and we see that his face is disfigured. He's missing an eye, and he has an injury to his nose and upper lip, which is causing the lip to pull up in the twist of the title. The businessman continues down the street, always looking around him as if he fears that someone's following him. And this man is Isa Whitney. On Baker Street, a woman disembarks from a carriage while another beggar, and there's beggars all over this story. This one is a woman, and she's shaking a tin cup full of change while another woman is cranking away at a hurdy-gurdy. And the beggar woman is robbed. But the client just ignores this and proceeds to 2-1 beat. Inside, Watson is wondering with Mrs. Hudson where Holmes is. They had an appointment to have dinner at Watson's club. Mrs. Hudson says that Holmes had mentioned it just before the lady called. Which lady? Watson wants to know as he's hanging up his coat. I don't know her name, but the lady called and Mr. Holmes went out, Mrs. Hudson tells him. So Holmes is off on a case. And, too bad they didn't have cell phones to text one another when plans were disrupted. But Watson doesn't seem too upset. I shall take advantage of an early night, he says, and then the doorbell rings, which puts an end to that desire. It might be a clue, says Mrs. Hudson. And so she goes to answer it. Watson sits down with his newspaper, and Mrs. Hudson brings up Mrs. Whitney, Isa Whitney's wife.
Yeah, you can hear Mrs. Hudson saying in the hallway, "Oh, he won't mind. He is the kindest of men." And then Watson throws his newspaper on the floor in disgust.
Yes. So Mrs. Whitney is played by Patricia Garwood, who is the wife of one of the writers of the series, Jeremy Paul. Yeah. So keeping it in the family. Watson greets her by name. Kate, this is a surprise. And he kisses her fondly, but she says, not a pleasant one, I fear, John. So they're on a first name basis with one another. He ushers her into the sitting room, and Mrs. Hudson goes to fix a pot of tea to help Mrs. Whitney calm down. Your assistant told me that you were dining with Mr. Holmes, Mrs. Whitney says. She had been to his surgery, but Watson had just left to come home. Mr. Holmes has disappeared without trace, as you can see, Watson tells her. In that case, I really shouldn't bother you with my problems, Mrs. Whitney says. Oh, Holmes disappears without trace at regular intervals. There's
not
really
that I'm bitter or anything.
Right. There's really no cause for alarm, only curiosity.
Sometimes he's gone for 3 years. Who knows?
Yes. And it's kind of clear that, like, she assumes that he's worried about Holmes being gone. He assumes that Mrs. Whitney is coming to see him because she's sick, but she tells him she's not.
Yes.
It's Isa, she says. If Isa is ill, I can see him at home, Watson says. So he's really not getting it. He is not at home, Mrs. Whitney says. He too has disappeared without trace, Watson says. You can probably guess what he is doing, Mrs. Whitney says. I imagine he's indulging his addiction. Opium? She nods. Watson points out that he's done this before. Why is this any different? Normally, these orgies are confined to one day, she says.
Multi-day orgies do require a lot of stamina.
Yes. So Isa will leave the house in the morning. He comes back at night, pale and shattered. But this time around, he's been gone for 48 hours. Watson asks where he is, and she tells him there's an opium den in Upper Swandam Lane called the Bar.
Yeah, I looked up that street. It does not exist.
No. But we're meant to, because it's by the docks.
Mm-hmm.
So we're meant to understand that it's in the East End, which at the time was a terrible, terrible area. So this opium den is called the Bar of Gold, and she says she doesn't dare go there by herself. And Watson agrees, saying no respectable woman would go within 100 miles of that vile alley unaccompanied. Mrs. Whitney asks Watson to come with her, but he says no, he'll go himself. And she's to go home and wait, and he'll have Isa Whitney back to her within 2 hours, though he says he cannot attest what state Isa will be in. At which point, Mrs. Hudson comes up with the tea. And Watson tells her he won't be needing it. He's going out, but Mrs. Whitney will have some. And what am I to tell Mr. Holmes? Mrs. Hudson wonders. Tell him I've disappeared without a trace, says Watson. I mean, he's full of snark this episode. He really is. So Watson goes out and gets a hansom cab and goes to Upper Swandam Lane. Meanwhile, Mrs. Whitney and Mrs. Hudson are having tea, and I love this exchange. Mrs. Whitney says, I sometimes wonder whether men ever truly grow up. They seem to remain little boys forever. Do you wonder about that, Mrs. Hudson? No, Mrs. Whitney, I don't wonder about it. Mrs. Hudson says, I know it. And they always need us to kiss them better afterwards, in a manner of speaking, of course.
Yeah, Mrs. Hudson is like, you know that I've not remarried since my husband died.
Right. Because it would be exhausting. And I also love the tea service that they're using.
Oh, yeah.
It's really quite pretty. It's got like red and blue flowers. And I started looking for it, and then I'm like, no, I'm overrun with China myself. It would be, I have no place to put this. In Upper Swandam Lane, Watson leaves the cab and is confronted by all these scenes of squalor. There's prostitutes soliciting, there's a scream emanating from somewhere, fights are breaking out. And to my mind, it seemed like it was meant to evoke Jack the Ripper, right? Danger lurking in every doorway. And Jack the Ripper was active in that area in 1888. And so the story was written in 1891.
Yeah.
That would have been top of mind.
Yep.
So inside the bar of gold, we see a Malaysian man mixing up opium and putting it into a pipe. As Watson enters, the Malaysian man offers him the pipe, but Watson refuses. There's a friend of mine here. I just wish to speak to Mr. Isa Whitney. And we get a look around the room. There are men lying on beds, bunks. Some of them are drooling, passed out, making weird hand gestures.
Yeah, there are women there too.
Yes. And Watson is holding a red silk handkerchief to his nose, presumably to avoid a contact high or the stench. And he sees Isa lying on a bunk. What's the time? What's the day? Isa says. Your wife has been waiting for you to come home for 2 days, Watson says. 2 days? Surely not. Isa says, the hours pass. 3 pipes? 4 pipes? I forget. Watson kind of rouses him and tells him they're going home. If you value my friendship and your wife's love. And Isa begins to cry at the mention of Kate's name. So he's full of remorse, as he probably usually is every time he does this.
Yeah.
It's the cycle.
Yep.
He says he has to pay, and Watson says he'll take care of it, not wanting Isa to, quote, pay for his own destruction. As Watson approaches the manager, who we find out is a Lascar, which we'll get into. But yeah, he's a South Asian looking guy. And he's grabbed suddenly by another opium addict. Let go, keep your hands off, he says. But when he kneels to get a good look at the addict, he sees it's Sherlock Holmes. He's in disguise with a large nose, a massive beard and eyebrows, and a very messy light brown wig. What on earth are you doing in this den? Watson demands. Like you, I'm going about my business. You have a cab outside? Yes, says Watson. I pray, and he looks over at Isa. Send him home. He looks too limp to get into any kind of mischief. I'll see you in 5 minutes.
And Watson is all, well, fuck Isa then. I'm going to go with Holmes.
Yes. So Watson gets Isa into the cab, sends him home with a note for Kate. Holmes, still in disguise, catches up with him outside. I suppose you think I've added opium smoking to all my other little weaknesses.
His eyes are very red, though.
Yes. I merely said I was surprised to see you there, Watson says. As indeed, I was to see you, Holmes says. Like they're pointing fingers at each other. I was searching for a friend, Watson protests. An eye for an enemy, Holmes says. Had I been recognized in that place, my life would not have been worth an hour's purchase. I'm in the midst of the most remarkable inquiry. I hope you're not smoking the substance in that pipe, Holmes, Watson says. Only to the extent necessary to merge with the surroundings, Holmes says, which is some bullshit. I'm off to Lee and Kent. Are you coming? Of course, says Watson. And Holmes gives his triumphant and hoists himself into a carriage he seems to have hired for the occasion.
Not a driver. They're driving themselves.
Yes. Watson takes the reins as Holmes divests himself of his disguise, once again carting around a ridiculous carpet bag that seems so very un-Holmes-like. It's red. It looks like an old lady's bag.
Yeah, it does.
Where are we going? Watson says. The Cedars, a lovely villa near Lee in Kent, says Holmes. May I ask why I'm going to Lee and Kent in the middle of the night on a Friday in March? Watson asks. Because you are my trusty comrade and my loyal chronicler, and I may need both, says Holmes. And he begins to outline the case. So a man named Neville St. Clair owns the Cedars. He's married the daughter of a local ale brewer. They have 2 small children, and we only see one of them in this episode. He's a businessman. He travels to London every day, always coming back by the 5:14 train every evening.
From Cannon Street, he says.
Oh, yes.
Cannon Street is the site of the London Stone, which is a really old piece of limestone. It's a remnant of a much larger thing that nobody knows what it was. It's been on display in the Museum of London. Like, there you can see a really old bit of limestone. You're welcome.
I just looked it up. It is really unremarkable looking.
Exactly.
Oh my God. Wow. I've been to that museum. They had a big Sherlock Holmes exhibit there. So he is, this Neville St. Clair, a man of temperate habits, a good husband, an affectionate father, and is popular with all who know him. He does not have outrageous debts. And we see the St. Clair family celebrating a child's birthday in this very homey and loving scene with a pink cake and pink presents.
Yeah, Holmes says his debt is 88 pounds, which is 9,523 pounds today. And he has 22 pounds to his credit, which is 23,809 pounds today. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
That's what he has in the bank.
A veritable paradigm, Watson says. Watson, there's a hint of skepticism in your voice, which does you no credit. Holmes. I expect Mrs. St. Clair came to you saying her husband had disappeared, Watson says. Exactly, says Holmes. That seems to be a continuous thread in life's fabric, Watson says. Watson, what is this? I shall ignore your air of resignation to the world's frailties and continue. So
Holmes please do. I love their chemistry here. They're very comfortable with each other.
So much banter and snark.
Yeah.
So Holmes tells him that on Monday, St. Clair left for the city as usual, promising to bring home a box of toy building bricks for his children. Soon after that, Mrs. St. Clair got a telegram saying there was a package waiting for her at the Aberdeen Shipping Company, which I guess is by the docks.
Oh, yeah. That was a real shipping company. It was founded in 1825. Their fastest ships set records for fastest voyages to and from Australia and the Far East.
Oh, wow.
Their fortunes changed in the 20th century, and the company was dissolved in 1957.
I wonder what was in that package, because we never find out.
No, we never do. I bet it was from the Far East.
So she decides to go to London herself to pick it up and do some shopping and have lunch, etc. It was by chance that she found herself in Upper Swandam Lane, that same vile alley we both visited this evening, Watson. And it was at this point that something quite singular took place, Holmes says. Which, again, I mean, Watson said, what is a respectable woman doing unaccompanied within 100 miles of Upper Swandam Lane? Yeah. But she was picking up a package at the docks. So we see Mrs. St. Clair in London in the alleyway, surrounded by beggars and addicts and suspicious characters of all sorts. She gives a couple of beggars some coins, but this is a mistake because then she's beset by a bunch of starving children. They're chased off by some workmen, but as she stops in the street and looks up, she sees her husband in the window of the opium den. Neville, she cries. He screams. He leaps away from the window.
It really is just a yell.
Yeah. Mrs. St. Clair knocks on the door, barges in, is greeted by the manager, the Lascar, who blocks her entry, demanding to know where she's going. I'm going upstairs, she says. There's nothing upstairs, the man says. I saw my husband waving from an upstairs window, she tells him. And the manager gaslights her. There's nobody upstairs. I saw him, she protests. I know my own husband. What's he doing here?
Do we ever really know the people we live with, though?
No, exactly. The manager and the Malaysian man who was filling the pipes grab hold of her and push her out the door. She screams, Neville, to no avail. So the manager, as we said, is a Lascar, which is a sailor from India who worked on British ships.
Yeah, they were first employed in the 16th century by the East India Company to fill the place of British sailors who died or deserted, according to ourimmigrationstory.org.uk. So because of that, their numbers swelled during the Napoleonic Wars in the 19th century, and the term Lascar began to be used for all non-European sailors.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's a Lascar in the book A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett, which I read when I was 8, and that's when I learned what a Lascar was, which is knowledge I never needed since then until now. The Lascar is, according to Holmes, a man of the vilest antecedents and a murderer into the bargain. A murderer.
I can't help but notice that criticism of the Lascar's ancestry comes first, and then, yes. Oh yeah, and he's also a murderer.
I mean, The racism.
Yeah.
Yeah. A murderer, yet he goes free, says Watson, who, twigs onto the important part of that sentence. The rear of the building backs onto the river. There's even a convenient trap door for the disposal of bodies, Holmes tells him. Why don't the police arrest these two murderers? Watson says again. Watson, the police have arrested a cripple, Holmes says. But then they arrive at the Cedars, so he can't say anymore. Inside the house, Mrs. St. Clair asks Holmes if there is any news. He says he thought she'd be asleep, but she tells him sleep does not come easily at a time like this. Holmes introduces Watson and says they're going to stay the night, and she takes them into a small dining room where a cold supper awaits them. It's a lot of food. It's like 2 huge pork pies and a big wedge of cheese and bread and like. And
Watson's like, well, that's for me. I don't know
right.
what's happening.
I hope you can find something to eat, Holmes. Dr. Watson, you take my place, she says, meaning her place at the table. Watson begins to protest, but Holmes tells him, Mrs. St. Clair is a very strong-willed woman. You refuse her at your peril. But before they sit down to eat, Mrs. St. Clair has some questions for Holmes. Do you, in your heart of hearts, think Neville is still alive?
And Holmes' expression is, oh, shit.
Yeah. Frankly, now, I'm not hysterical, nor am I given to fainting, she says. Frankly, then, he says, I do not. You think he is dead? I do. Murdered? I didn't say that. Perhaps. And on what day did he meet his death, she asks. On Monday. So how do you explain that I received a letter from him today, Friday? And she hands him the letter.
These were all trick questions, Mr. Holmes.
Right. Holmes examines the letter with his magnifying glass. Now, Mrs. St. Clair, I wonder if you would do me a favor, he asks. By all means. I have told Dr. Watson what happened up to the moment when you were ejected from that building. Will you tell us what happened subsequently, please? For Dr. Watson's benefit, she asks, and for mine. I, too, have to re-examine the facts as we know them. Now, if you're not too tired. And Watson takes out his itty-bitty, teeny-tiny notebook. And I was thinking at this point, it's a good thing the supper's already cold because it's not getting any warmer while
all of this goes on. Can we chat over dinner at least?
As you may imagine, I do not take kindly to being forcibly removed from a building. I sought and found police help, she says. 2 constables and Inspector Bradstreet. With them, she returned to the building 20 minutes after having been ejected. By that time, the door was unlocked, although she was certain the Lascar had locked it after her. The police burst in and tell the Lascar and the Malaysian man that they want to go.
Nobody ever goes in and out of rooms,
No, they
don't ever unbolt doors once you've bolted them.
The Lascar sneeringly says there's nobody upstairs, but the inspector and Mrs. St. Clair rush up past him and leave the constables below. The room is, of course, empty, with the Lascar saying, time and time, I tell you, there's nobody up here. And Mrs. St. Clair rushes to another room and screams. It's the man with the twisted lip, the match-selling beggar. But the inspector tells Mrs. St. Clair he's nobody to be afraid of. He's an old friend of the constabulary, he says. You know, Inspector, according to W.S. Gilbert, a policeman's lot is not a happy one, the beggar says. W.S. Gilbert, of course, being half of Gilbert and Sullivan.
Yes.
Mr. Boone is a professional beggar, the inspector says, but Boone protests, whipping out his matches. An honest trader, he says. You tell me nobody lived here, said Mrs. St. Clair. Madam, a beggar is nobody, says the Lascar. If you prick us, did we not bleed, says Boone. Shakespeare, Mr. Boone, I know that one, says the inspector. You've told it to me before. Mrs. St. Clair goes to the window and opens it, calling for the inspector to come over. The river comes, says the inspector. And a large window, says Mrs. St. Clair. A window and a river in close proximity does not automatically mean violent death, the inspector says.
I mean, Neville isn't dead, but I hate the way they're all gaslighting her.
Yes, being very patronizing.
Yeah.
He turns back to Boone. Have you been here for the last hour? Yes, Boone says, which is not a lie. Anyone else been here? Alas, no. I've been as lonely as a cloud, says Boone, which is Wordsworth, of course. The Lascar is very amused at all of this and is laughing as they leave Boone's room. He was standing there, protests Mrs. St. Clair. I saw him. Mrs. St. Clair, there is no evidence to suggest that he was ever there, says the inspector, and he turns to leave. But Mrs. St. Clair finds a box in the corner. "Building bricks, Inspector," she says, holding one up. And these are really pretty little blocks.
Yeah.
They're illustrated with little scenes. "So I see," says the inspector disinterestedly. "My husband left for the city this morning, and the last thing he said to me was he had to buy some building bricks for our little girl's birthday," she tells him. "Either of you gentlemen buy building bricks?" the inspector asks the Lascar and the Malaysian man, and they laugh. "Somebody must have left them," the Lascar says.
Even though we just said nobody's been here.
Right. Mrs. St. Clair goes to another corner, pulling back a curtain. "And these are my husband's clothes," she says accusingly. The inspector comes over. "Shall I describe them to you in detail as you examine them?" she asks. "My husband's tailor's name is Smart, if you care to examine the label." And Boone seems to be hyperventilating as he cowers behind the Lascar. Back at the Cedars, Mrs. St. Clair tells Holmes and Watson that it was at that moment the inspector began to believe her story. Holmes tells Watson that the police searched the building and found a blood stain on the windowsill. They searched the proprietors and Boone, but found nothing. "They failed to find my husband's overcoat," Mrs. St. Clair tells Watson. And he's busy writing all this down in his tiny notebook. "Until low tide, the overcoat had been thrown in the river, presumably out the window." We see the police lifting up the coat. It's been weighted down, and as they move it around, it's jingling. They open it up and find 421 pennies and 270 halfpennies stuffed into various pockets of the coat.
So that is 275 pounds today.
Which is a lot for a beggar.
Yeah.
"Your conclusion, Watson," Holmes says. Mrs. St. Clair tells Watson to speak freely. "I've lived with every possibility this past week, however hideous. The murderer must have been Boone the beggar. Who else would have access to such a large number of pennies and halfpennies," says Watson. Which,
Yeah, but what beggar is going to be hoarding that much stuff? When you're that poor, you spend money as you get it. You need to buy food, you need something to drink, you need shelter,
right. Exactly.
and that's likely what he took in that day. So nobody wants to sit down and do the math here.
No. And I don't know if have you ever worked retail in New York?
No.
We would get, when I used to work in a independent bookstore in Grand Central before the renovation, and when it was homeless central, and we would get homeless people coming in with and we would welcome them because we needed the change, right? They would exchange their quarters and nickels and dimes and pennies for dollar bills because they were easier to carry.
Mm-hmm.
And we needed the change to give out. So it was a weird symbiosis that worked. But yeah, burdened down with coinage.
Yes.
So Holmes tells them they've arrested Boone, who is now in Bow Street Police Station, home, as we know, of the former Bow Street Runners, which had by this time been absorbed into the Metropolitan Police, which had built a new station house on Bow Street. So that part's real.
Oh.
Yeah. "Even though my husband is still alive," Mrs. St. Clair says, because of course she's received her husband's letter. "Let us re-examine the significance of this letter," Holmes says, and he reads the letter aloud. "Dearest, do not be frightened. There is a huge error, which it may take some little time to rectify. Wait in patience, Neville." Then Holmes looks at the paper on which the letter is written. Written in pencil on the flyleaf of a book, octavo size, no watermark, posted in Gravesend by a man with a dirty thumb.
A flyleaf is a blank page next to the end papers. You can have a book. They're there for structural support.
Yep.
And an octavo is a book or pamphlet made up of one or more full sheets of paper on which 16 pages of text are printed, and then it's folded 3 times to make 8 leaves, which is the snooty word for pages.
Yes, and they're all sewn together into a book. So Holmes holds up the envelope. "This is not your husband's writing?" "No," she says, "but the note is. Without question, it's the hand he always used when he was in a hurry. Whoever gummed down the envelope, unless I am very much in error," and here Holmes sniffs the envelope, "had been chewing tobacco. This is a trifle, of course, but there is nothing so important as trifles, Holmes says.
Except this one, which means nothing.
Right. He holds up the envelope again. Mrs. St. Clair, there was an enclosure. A signet ring, Mrs. St. Clair says, and she hands it to him. Has your husband ever spoken of the bar of gold in Upper Swandam Lane? Holmes says. Never, says Mrs. St. Clair. I suspect that Dr. Watson has a question to put to you, Holmes says, turning to Watson. This is a difficult question to ask, Mrs. St. Clair, but has your husband ever shown any signs of taking opium? Watson asks. He always appeared perfectly normal, though I confess I would not recognize the signs, she says. What are they? Listlessness, a lack of energy, an inability to concentrate, general air of apathy, Watson says.
Listlessness.
Dr. Watson is a specialist in uncontrolled addictions, Holmes said. So maybe it's his turn to be snarky. My husband was not an opium addict. That is to say, is not an opium addict. Mr. Holmes, I know you think my husband is dead. I fully realize the letter could have been written on Monday and only posted today. I know the circumstances as they are described lead to the inescapable conclusion that he's been murdered, but equally, I know he is alive, she says. There is such a keen bond of sympathy between us. I should know if evil came upon him.
I could feel it through the force.
Yes. Holmes holds up the signet ring and she takes it. Please help me to find him, she says, and leaves the room. Presumably, they then sit down to dinner. Watson must be ravenous. Later, we see Watson coming out from what I thought was a bathroom in his nightshirt and overcoat because he didn't pack a robe.
Yeah, but he also didn't pack a nightshirt, and he's not the same size as Neville, so they just, I guess, happen to have extra nightshirts hanging around or something.
Well, on the other hand, Holmes never puts on his nightshirt. He's still dressed. He's got his...
Yeah, he never does sleep in this.
So Watson picks up a doll from the floor outside the door. We see Holmes sitting on a chaise longue in their guest room in the mouse-colored dressing gown, but with his like almost tuxedo underneath. And he's smoking his pipe and thinking. Watson comes into the room. Watson, if Neville St. Clair is alive and well, why doesn't he come home and demonstrate the fact, says Holmes. Presumably because he's not alive and well, says Watson. Ever the soul of logic and common sense. Yes, but this letter, Holmes says, holding it up, could have been written at any time, perhaps under duress. It could even be a skillful forgery. And the signet ring? Easily removed, especially if the victim is dead. Proceeding on the hypothesis that Neville St. Clair is dead, how did he meet his death? Holmes asks. Clearly he was murdered, says Watson. By whom? Well, the police think it was this chap Boone. I see no reason to disagree with the police, except what? Holmes asks. You said he's a cripple. How severe is his disability? He has a slight limp, Holmes says. My medical experience tells me that when there is weakness in one limb, it's very often compensated by exceptional strength in the others. And Holmes is looking skeptical. This man is a professional beggar. He's well known in the city. And again, the city in this case means the financial district in the same way we refer to Wall Street.
Yeah, well-known men never commit crimes, as we all know.
He's well liked in the city. I've seen him many times. He has a remarkable faculty for repartee, which delights his many clients. Sounds harmless, says Watson. Why did the police arrest him instead of the Lascar? The very question I put to Inspector Bradstreet, Holmes says. And we see Boone being dragged into the Bow Street station protesting his innocence. Holmes is there in Bradstreet's office. By process of elimination, Boone must be the murderer, Bradstreet is telling Holmes. Are these Neville St. Clair's clothes? Holmes says, nodding to a suit, a collar, a necktie, a watch chain, and a tie pin lying on a table. Why did you eliminate the Lascar as a suspect? Because Mrs. St. Clair saw her husband in an upstairs window, apparently in the middle of a struggle. She went to the downstairs door and was confronted by the Lascar. So he couldn't have been upstairs struggling with Neville. And Holmes is examining the watch through his magnifying glass. While they were conversing, or to be more precise, while the Lascar and his assistant were ejecting Mrs. St. Clair from the building, the fight was proceeding upstairs, leading, as we now know, to the death of Neville St. Clair, Bradstreet continues. Holmes hands the watch to Bradstreet. A 21st birthday present. A man of meticulous habits. No scratches. What was the motive in killing St. Clair? That remains to be established, Bradstreet says. Holmes then smells the cuff of the suit coat. Not a trace of opium, he says. Bradstreet gives it a whiff as well. Could it be robbery? No, says Bradstreet. His wallet was in his pocket with the money untouched, and they ruffle through, the bills. How do you explain the coins in the overcoat? Holmes asks. I cannot truly answer that, Mr. Holmes, Bradstreet says.
Weight it down, maybe.
Let me try. And Holmes assumes the classic I am thinking pose with his forefinger against his lips, staring off into the middle distance. Jeremy Brett's just really great at posing as Holmes, thinking. Yes. Boone kills St. Clair. He removes the outer garments, hoping to capitalize on them and their contents. He lifts the body, carries it across the room, forces it through the open window, hence the abrasion, blood upon the windowsill. He releases it into the river, where it's swept away with the tide, Bradstreet says. In the midst of this activity, he hears the scuffle downstairs. As Mrs. St. Clair tries to force her way in, there's not a moment to be lost. He starts with the overcoat. He realizes at once that it will float and not sink, so what does he do? He rushes across the room to some secret hoard where he's accumulated the fruits of his beggary, stuffs all the
hoard. If he was homeless, he would not be making this much money.
Right, exactly, yes. Stuffs all the coins that he can lay his hand on into the pockets of the overcoat and drops them in the water, Bradstreet says, and would presumably have done the same with the other garments if you and your men had not arrived. Bradstreet laughs at this, conceals the other garments behind the curtain in the hopes they'll not be noticed, and they would not have been noticed had Mrs. St. Clair not been so persistent, which doesn't say a whole lot for the police. Inspector, whatever plot has been hatched in that opium den, I cannot but imagine the Lascar is not somehow involved, Holmes says, in his usual straightforward way, with triple negatives. I was sorely tempted to arrest him on the day. I'll send a couple of men there now, Bradstreet says.
You are arrested on suspicion of not being a white man.
Basically. But Holmes says he has a better idea. He's going to visit the opium den himself, incognito. And that is where Watson found him at the beginning of the episode. So back in in their guest bedroom at the Cedars, Watson says, what did you learn? Nothing, says Holmes.
But he had a really great time inhaling the opium.
That was exactly, yes. That was exactly my thinking too. Everybody, as far as I can ascertain, appears to be telling the truth. I cannot see an overall pattern. Can you see a pattern, Watson? Watson's getting into bed. I cannot see a pattern, he says, but I do see a woman who, despite all objective circumstances, still believes that her husband is alive. And you've said on many occasions that the impression of a woman may be more valuable than the conclusion of an analytical reasoner. Probably
how they're posed as mutually exclusive.
Right. And to my mind, the analytical reasoner is, as with many analytical reasoners, discounting the things that don't quite add up.
Yep.
But if he is still alive, Holmes says, where is he? I have no idea, says Watson, but I do have an urgent request. It's now past 4 a.m. May I go to sleep? Certainly, Holmes says. Thank you, says Watson, snuffing out the candle. And Holmes is sitting in the dark, still smoking. A little girl in a white nightgown enters the room carrying the doll that Watson has found on the floor outside. And she smiles at Holmes, who kind of smiles back. And then she leaves Holmes to his deductions, closing the bedroom door. But she's just always kind of around.
Mm-hmm.
Holmes stays up all night, thinking with his eyes closed. We see the sun rise in the window behind him.
Yeah, the camera sort of zooms in on Holmes. And his eyes, this is an old cinematography thing that was very prevalent in the 80s, where the eyes would have a little light just focused right on them to emphasize them. So yeah, we've got that here with Holmes. His eyes are highlighted. There's a light source in the room, like light coming through the window, except he has his back to the window. There's no other light in the room. So like,
yeah.
Okay.
We see him open his eyes. We see him at the wash basin washing his face. He straightens up, still dripping, and looks at himself in the mirror. And he's got an idea. He claps his hands together, spraying the mirror with droplets of water. Watson? Holmes is in his overcoat and hat with a brown knitted scarf wrapped around his neck. He tweaks Watson on his bare foot, sticking out from the covers. And Watson wakes up. What time is it? Dawn, says Holmes. And Watson looks at his watch. I've only had 2 hours sleep, he says. I wonder, would you do me the very great kindness of considering the possibility of waking up?
I love that line.
I assume you have a good reason, Watson says. Are you game for a drive? Holmes asks. Certainly, but does it have to be this early? I have a little theory I wish to test, Holmes says. Is anyone's life at stake? Certainly not, Holmes says. Would it be possible to test your theory a little later this morning? I'll see you downstairs in 5 minutes.
Watson is me in this scene.
Oh, I would be murderous. Watson joins Holmes in the carriage. As they pull away from the house, we see the little girl again. She's now dressed and smiling at them from out the window. She is adorable.
She's very cute. I also like to think that they don't have a child this age and she's just a ghost who happens to live there.
I like that too. You have the grand gift of silence, Watson. It makes you quite invaluable as a companion, Holmes remarks as they drive through the countryside. Watson is...
This line was used really well in the Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes movie.
Oh, yes.
Watson is seething silently. Holmes is trying to get him to talk, and finally he says, the grand gift of silence makes you invaluable as a companion. And then Watson punches him.
In this case, Watson's presumably too exhausted to speak.
Yes, and Watson is already asleep and not listening at all.
Holmes is riled up, though. Watson, you're in the presence of one of the most absolute fools in Europe. I deserve to be kicked from here to Charing Cross. The moment you woke me up, I would have been prepared to, Watson says grouchily. But Holmes cuts him off. I've got the key here in this Gladstone bag, and he brandishes a small leather duffel. They arrive at the Bow Street station. Watson, I confess I've been as blind as a mole, but it's better to learn wisdom late than never learn it at all. And they go into Bradstreet's office. I've come about that beggar man, Boone, Holmes says. He'll probably be asleep, says Bradstreet. Most of the population is probably asleep, Holmes says Watson. I mean, after 2 hours sleep, I would kill people. I would literally kill people. Especially if I'm expected to be cogent.
Same.
I get really annoyed if I'm woken up before I'm ready, and I have wrecked a few alarm clocks in rage. Now I have an Amazon Echo, and I can't wreck it. Bradstreet takes them to the cells, telling Holmes he can leave the Gladstone bag with him, but Holmes says he's going to take it with him. Watson rolls his eyes and mutters to Bradstreet, "It contains the key." A dirty scoundrel, filthy, refuses to wash, says Bradstreet. Says washing weakens a man's resistance. And they peer. I know, right. And they peer into his cell. I mean, there was a theory that washing would weaken your resistance to germs.
Yeah, but wasn't that dispelled by the 1890s?
Absolutely. Yes. Well, and I mean, the poor guy who
Oh, yeah. Doctors, could you please wash your hands and not go from like an autopsy to childbirth? And
yeah, exactly.
he ended up in an insane asylum. His doctors were like, how dare you accuse us of killing our patients?
The arrogance, the absolute arrogance. And this is, again, in England, the English arrogance.
Yep.
Specifically, it's a specific kind.
Yes, it is.
Inspector, would you do me the great goodness of opening the door as quietly as possible, Holmes says, and he removes his coat and picks up the Gladstone bag. They enter Boone's cell. Holmes opens up the bag, and Boone begins to wake up, looking blearily around him. From the bag, Holmes takes out an enormous yellow sponge. He soaks it in a basin. Boone looks terrified. Holmes takes his time wringing out the sponge, lathering it up. I mean, this is torturous for Boone.
Yeah, he's making a big production out of this.
Yes. He approaches Boone with it, who would protest, but his face is covered by a giant sponge.
Yeah, Holmes just smashes the sponge.
Yes, boom. Some of the dirt washes away, and then Holmes pours a pitcher of water over Boone's head, and we see a disguise beginning to kind of melt away. Turns out Boone has 2 perfectly good eyes, a fine nose, a normal mouth. Gentlemen, Holmes says, let me introduce you to Neville St. Clair of Lee in the county of Kent. Great heavens, says Bradstreet. It is true, says Boone / St. Clair. Pray, what am I being charged with?
You are being charged with wasting police time and resources. Sir.
Well, I mean, that should be it, right? But Bradstreet says, charged with making away with Mr. Neville St. Clair. What, charged with making away with myself? I've been on the force for 27 years. This takes the cake, Bradstreet says. Since it's obvious that no crime has been committed, I am illegally detained, says St. Clair. And then he assumes Boone's accent. My strength is as the strength of 10 because my heart is pure. Alfred Lord Tennyson. And he's laughing.
Lock him up.
You lied to your wife, Mr. St. Clair. Is that purity? Holmes demands.
And St. Clair says, why, yes, actually, it is.
Because in that day and age, it probably, yeah. It doesn't matter if you lie to your wife. Back in Bradstreet's office, we see Neville St. Clair all cleaned up and looking respectable. He's quite a handsome man. His beggar's clothes and matches are all laid out on the table where his suit and tie had been. The building bricks are in their case besides the clothes. Let it be understood that I would have endured imprisonment, even execution, rather than reveal my miserable secret to my wife and children, he says. All is now revealed, says. So be it. I mean, this guy's a real blowhard. My father was a schoolmaster in Chesterfield. I've received an excellent education, so we know. Traveled, took to the stage, and finally became a reporter on a London newspaper. One day, my editor wished to have a series of articles upon begging in the metropolis, and I volunteered to supply them, St. Clair says. And he looks too wealthy to be a journalist.
Yeah.
So you became a beggar, Watson says. Yes, St. Clair says. And your expertise as an actor must have proved invaluable, Holmes says. And he should know, because he's the master of disguises.
Yes.
I painted my face to look as pitiable as possible. I manufactured frightening scars. I mean, they really were disturbing. Mm-hmm. I twisted my lip with the aid of a flesh-colored plaster, and then with a dark wig and appropriate clothing, took my position in the busiest part of the metropolis, ostensibly as a match seller, but yes, really, as a beggar, St. Clair says. And you did well, Holmes says. In one day, I took in 26 shillings and 4 pence.
Approximately 134 pounds today.
Which is, yeah. I wrote my articles for the newspaper, and my editor was delighted, and I thought no more about it until one day I backed a bill for a friend of mine and had a writ served on me for 25 pounds.
2,691 pounds today.
Yeah, I'd have problems with that too.
Yeah. He had 220 pounds in bank.
I know, yeah.
Pay the bill.
Right. Well, I was at my wit's end. I mean, what could I do? And then suddenly an idea.
Pay the bill, use my own money. No way.
Came to me. I asked for a fortnight's holiday from my employers and spent the time in the city begging. In 10 days, I had the money and was able to pay back the debt. That was when I fell into the trap, St. Clair says. How much were you earning from the newspaper at this time? Holmes asks. £2 a week.
215 pounds today.
Yeah, well, nobody said journalism made a ton of money.
Nope.
Far less than begging, Watson notes. During the last few years, I had earned, on average, at least £700 a year, says St. Clair, which explains.
Yeah, 75,375 pounds today.
That's a gentleman's income, says Bradstreet. And he's
apparently do not live in New Jersey in 2025.
Right. But I found that Bradstreet was like, he's offended that the son of a schoolmaster has risen above his class and is now a gentleman, quote unquote.
Yep.
Because police are going to police. They're going to police behavior as well as everything else.
Yep.
People do not expect a beggar to quote extensively from Shakespeare, Mr. Dickens, the Bible, or the latest popular songs, says St. Clair. An aristocrat among beggars, Watson says. Well, it is not for me to claim such a distinction, St. Clair says. But as the inspector rightly observes, I had a gentleman's income. So I proceeded to live like a gentleman. I bought a villa in Kent. I married a beautiful and respectable woman, and every morning I traveled to my business in the city. You must have been embroiled with the Lascar by this time, Holmes says. Yes, I paid him a generous rent to use his upstairs rooms. My secret was safe with him. I fell among thieves, but found honor of a sort. You see, every morning I would emerge as a squalid beggar and every evening transform into a gentleman. Tell us about Monday, Holmes says. I had finished for the day and was dressing in my room above the opium den, and suddenly I looked out of the window. To my horror and astonishment, there was my wife in the street, her eyes fixed full upon me.
I said, and jumped backwards.
Right. And we replay the scene, yes, where Mrs. St. Clair sees her husband in the window and he acts like a scared little girl. St. Clair we see him talking with the Lascar. You must not let her in, he says. I'll say there's nobody upstairs, the Lascar says. She will return with the police. I'll tell them there's nobody upstairs, the Lascar says. Mr. Boone will be upstairs. Ah, Mr. Boone is a lodger. He has a right to be upstairs. And we see Boone in his disguise throwing the weighted down overcoat out the window, and he would have done the same with the clothing, but there was no time. We found blood on the windowsill, says Bradstreet. In my haste to open the window, I cut myself, St. Clair explains. He shows Bradstreet the wound, a minor abrasion. If you prick me,
Hey, I feel like that's kind of up there with, what is it, the Pete Holmes parody of A Study in Pink, of when Holmes and Watson first meet each other. And, he's going through all the same deductions that Sherlock does.
Yes.
And then one by one, Watson's like, yeah, that's not what happened. But it's like, kind of like The Watch. Like,
yeah,
those scuff marks. Yeah, it's a tiny hole.
Right.
Anybody's.
Oh no, he must have been drunk.
We found blood on the windowsill. Yeah, I cut myself when I was closing it.
So St. Clair sits back down and says, and thus I was arrested on suspicion of murdering myself. And thus you caused your wife much anguish, Holmes says. He's really annoyed with St. Clair. I wrote her a letter, St. Clair protests, and gave it to the Lascar to post. It was not delivered. It arrived yesterday. He probably gave it to one of his sailor customers, Bradstreet says. So, yeah. St. Clair, upon knowing this, is horrified. I shall never forgive myself the agony I've inflicted upon my wife. Can I go to her now? I think we must impose one condition, Mr. St. Clair, Bradstreet says. Anything. There must be no more of you, Boone, Bradstreet says. I swear it by the most solemn oath a man can take, says St. Clair. And next we see him burning Boone's disguise over an open fire by the opium den.
What is the most solemn oath a man can take? I'm now curious what he thinks that is.
Yeah, I have no clue. Farewell, sweet Boone, a flight of angels sing thee to thy rest. William Shakespeare, he said.
Off.
And a real beggar is sitting nearby, and I think we're meant to look at St. Clair as kind of a thief.
Yes, exactly. Because St. Clair looks at her and, is just like, well, sucks to be these people, I guess.
Yeah. Meanwhile, he's been stealing money that would have otherwise gone to them.
Yes, exactly. I no doubt his articles for the newspaper were about how easy it is to get rich begging, and that's why we should save money by cutting welfare and food stamps. These people that you see begging, they're just pretending to be poor. Really, you're being taken advantage of, and that is why I signed the big, beautiful bill. But also, like you said, people only have so much money to give to charity, so by giving money to this guy who had a decent job, they're not giving it to the people who actually needed it. Fuck them.
Exactly. Yes. Mrs. St. Clair, we see her approaching him and they walk off together, and that's the end of the episode. So I looked this up. There really was, in the 1870s, well before this story was written, a journalist who disguised himself as a beggar for reporting purposes. He was a British man who emigrated to New York and worked for the New York Times. His name was Arthur Pember. He also disguised himself as a circus performer for the same series of articles. How the other half lives. Well, still
tell me he was a high wire.
I know.
Artist.
Yeah, the article I read didn't say.
Set him to work at the Lions.
While still in England, he was the first president of the Football Association, which established the first formal rules of soccer, as we call it here. Until then, the rules varied on whether the football club followed the rugby school rules or other rules. I mean, all these rules came out of the what they call public schools, private schools. He also climbed Mont Blanc. And eventually he had 10 children and moved from New York to the Dakota territories
I had way too much energy.
and began writing his memoirs before he died of kidney disease. So there was precedent there. There's a lot of strains, and I kind of feel like, like a lot of writers, Doyle kind of draws from like the flotsam and jetsam that kind of flows through his, like, I remember this guy. Let me figure something out about him. Or oh yeah, Jack the Ripper. We got to make this place a scary place.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like whatever is
whatever's out there.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I didn't know about that guy.
Yeah.
Pember. It sounds like his last name is missing a syllable.
Yes, I agree. It should be Pemberton or Pemberton. Yeah. But yes, back to the fact that St. Clair was essentially taking money out of poor people's mouths.
Yep.
Granted, £2 a week was not a lot of money, and but he got himself into this situation. I mean, what's he going to tell his wife now?
Yeah.
How's he going to keep up the house?
Yeah.
With servants and presumably, gardeners and what have you. Like,
his kids are going to have some stories to tell when they grow up.
He was a con man.
Yeah. Yeah. And he was doing this before he married his wife.
Yes. So he married her on a lie. She could have that marriage annulled.
Ooh. I bet that's what happens. Somebody needs to write some fanfic about.
Yes.
Neville St. Clair Part 2.
Well, Mrs. St. Clair was, as Holmes says, a formidable woman. I can only imagine what her reaction would be.
Oh yeah, he will be begging by the time she's done with it. The marriage is annulled. You owe me X amount of money for X amount of years.
And she goes back to live with Dad, with their kids, who he never gets to see again.
Yes.
My God. Any other thoughts on this episode?
Fuck this guy.
Yeah, fuck this guy. Basically.
Yeah.
I mean, I get that the reason he was making money hand over fist as a beggar is because he was charming, but even that's unrealistic.
Yes.
You could be as charming as hell. I mean, there. Again, when I was working in Grand Central, there were homeless people who were quite charming, but they never got themselves out of that situation.
Right.
I don't know what happened to them after, Jacqueline Onassis went in with. I mean, they remodeled the station and shooed the homeless people out, and I don't know whatever happened to them.
Was this after the asylums were closed?
Yes, well after, yeah.
So that's the thing that's fairly unique to our country, in that a lot of our homeless are people who would have been in the asylums, except asylums were.
Which is not to say the asylums were great.
No, they were not. But it's I had to look this up. It seems like the promise had been, we'll close the asylums and then come up with something to replace them.
Small community homes.
Yeah, and you can tell that the real goal was just to close the asylums, because we'll come up with something to replace them never happened.
Yeah. Actually, on Staten Island, there was a famous case.
Oh yeah.
Geraldo Rivera, of all people, brought it to national attention.
Oh really?
Yes. Back when he was a legitimate journalist.
Yeah.
Before he went into Al Capone's vault and found nothing. The institution was called Willowbrook.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a warehouse for people with developmental disabilities. And they were naked. They were shitting themselves.
Yeah, I think it had at least 10 times the number of patients, the number of patients that it was supposed to have.
Exactly. It was a scandal and a horror show. And they did close it down. The replacements that they eventually came up with were these small community group homes, but they're so underfunded.
Yep.
And there's if, unless you're on top of this people all the time, there's a lot of abuse that goes on.
Yep.
So there was never a satisfactory conclusion. And, so we're kind of back where, because Dickens wrote about all of these beggars.
Yeah.
We're kind of like, not quite, but, I imagine after the Big Beautiful Bill.
Oh yeah, we'll be right back there.
Yeah. Yeah. And we need another Dickens.
Yeah, we really do.
Not that he was a great person, but he was a very good writer.
We need something like The Wire, but in novel form.
Yeah, well, although that said, nobody reads except us. But once the novel's written, then it becomes a TV series, and then people pay attention, and then we've got The Wire again.
Hey, why don't we just put The Wire back on?
Exactly. I have been thinking about a rewatch, actually. It's so good.
Yeah, it is.
Any other thoughts?
No, I think that's it. That's all from us this week. If you've enjoyed the show and haven't subscribed yet, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to support us, you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Tell your friends, and join us next week when we'll be discussing the 6 Napoleons. I love that the story.
Me too. Yes. All right. We will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.